Chapter 23. Once more he was in Changhua, a past that shadowed his present. In a frenetic blur of images, he grew aware of a whirlwind of activity, a rampage through the island. He had found what he had feared. Then, a series of fleeting, aleatory pictures. The flight attendant on the Cathay Pacific flight, a geisha of the airways. Another bourbon was a hand gesture away, and she kept him well supplied. The taxi driver at Dulles, a Trinidadian with sunken cheeks and strong views about the quickest route. Ambler's apartment at Baskerton Towers, which seemed that day so small, so sterile, little more than a place to bathe and dress and prepare himself, so it seemed, for battle. For battle. What battle? An odd sort of fog swept over his memories again, a hovering opacity. But Ambler... No, Tarquin. He was Tarquin. Had felt a glinting emotion. If he could retrieve the emotion, he could retrieve the memories that came with it. The emotion was a particular and a particularly potent compound, partly guilt, mostly rage. The fog thinned. Buildings and people came into view. Voices, at first dissolved into a stream of white noise, became audible and distinct. The urgency that drove him became vivid, real, present. Tarquin lacked the moral narcissism to suppose that his hands were ever clean, but he was outraged to discover that they had just been made bloody by an unfathomable lapse of professionalism. Transients had to be told. Still seething with fury and disbelief, Tarquin returned to headquarters in Washington, D.C. A man with a tie like countless others in a great stone building like countless others. He went straight to the stop, to the undersecretary in charge of the Political Stabilization Unit, to transients. And then the unfathomable became the unpardonable. Undersecretary Ellen Whitfield, the patrician director of the Political Stabilization Unit, was someone he knew well, arguably too well. She was a handsome woman with a strong chin, a small straight nose and high cheekbones. Her chestnut hair set off dark blue eyes that she accentuated with a dab of eyeshadow. She was handsome. Once to him she had been almost beautiful. That had been many years ago, near the beginning of his career, when she was still involved in field ops. And their affair, consummated mainly in Quonset huts in the northern Mariana Islands, lasted less than a month. What happens in Saipan, she told him with a smile, stays in Saipan. She applied for an administrative posting at the State Department soon afterward. He accepted his next assignment in the field. His special skills made him indispensable there, they told him. In the ensuing years, their careers diverged in some ways, converged in others. At Consop, she became known for a surpassingly well-organized mind. Few administrators were as nimble at processing and prioritizing the various tiers of intelligence and action items. She also showed herself to be adept at office politics, at flattering her superiors without appearing to do so, at wrong-footing those who stood in her path to advancement, again, without ever betraying her intent. A year after receiving her first D.C. posting, she was made Associate Director of the East Asian and Pacific Affairs Desk. 2 years later, she had been seconded to the Deputy Director of Consular Operations. 3 years after that, she became a Division Director in her own right, and rapidly revivified the Political Stabilization Unit, expanding its purview and range of operations. Within consular operations itself, STAB was regarded as highly proactive, critics said, reckless, and now it became far more so. To its critics, the STAB operatives were heedless of the rules and overly aggressive, treating the edicts of international law with all the respect a Boston driver gave to traffic signs. That someone who seemed as prim and controlled as Ellen Whitfield had presided over this transformation took some of her colleagues by surprise. Not Ambler. He knew she had a streak of wildness, a blend of impetuousness and calculation, and something that would once have been called devilry. Once, during a humid August in Saipan, he had found it arousing. Yet Whitfield, who had earned the civilian rank of undersecretary, was now proving curiously elusive. There were times when Ambler wondered whether their quote-unquote history made her uncomfortable around him, but in truth she never seemed that sort of person, or showed any sign that she regarded the affair as more than an agreeable pastime during an otherwise tedious posting. An agreeable pastime agreeably ended. By the fourth time Ambler was told that Undersecretary Whitfield was in a meeting, he knew he was being shut out. He had already written up and transmitted his report on the Luang debacle. What he wanted now was accountability. He wanted her to say that she would conduct a full and proper inquiry into this disastrous failure of intelligence. He wanted an acknowledgement that Stab had gone awry and would take steps to set its house in order. Surely it was not too much to ask. 5 days after his arrival at Foggy Bottom, Ambler learned through informal channels that Whitfield had not even filed an official memorandum about his complaint, as standard protocol stipulated. It was an outrage. Whitfield was known, even lauded, for her perfectionist tendencies. Was she so embarrassed by her failure that she refused to make a clean breast of it, but to the Director of Consular Operations and the Secretary of State? Did she think she could arrange a cover-up, given everything that he had managed to find out? He needed to confront her to hear her explanation. He needed to hear it face to face. He felt a surge of the fury he had known in Changhua, the fury at betrayal. It was now Friday afternoon, the end of a Washington work week, but not the end of his. "I'm sorry, but Undersecretary Whitfield is in a meeting. You can leave another message if you like." When he phoned an hour later, the assistant's reply was equally impassive. An underling requested to fend off a pest. "I'm sorry, Undersecretary Whitfield has left for the day." Insanity! Did she really think she could avoid him? Avoid the truth forever? Livid, he got into a car and drove to Whitfield's home, in the outskirts of Fox Hollow, a village west of Washington. He knew where she lived, and there would be no evading him there. A half hour later, he nosed his car past a white post and rail fence, into the long drive, a graceful, gently curving allée lined with pear trees. The house itself was a tall, stately Monticello-style structure, with elegantly corniced and quoined facades of weathered red brick and large bay windows. It was surrounded by artfully pruned magnolias and high-mounted rhododendrons. Broad stone steps led from the circular drive to the carved oak entrance door. The Whitfield family, he recalled, had made several industrial fortunes during the 19th century, some involving steel smelting and railroad ties, some involving not the manufacture but the export of such products. The family fortune ebbed somewhat in the post-war years, as the family scions moved into sectors more notable for cultural or intellectual prestige than for the generation of wealth. There is a Whitfield at the Metropolitan Museum, at the National Gallery, at the Hudson Institute, as well as a few who had drifted to the more sanitized realms of international banking. But well-managed trust funds ensured that no Whitfield needed to worry over much about the brutish business of getting and spending, and as with the Rockefellers, a family ethic of service had somehow persisted over the decades. The fact that service did not require the repudiation of earthly pelf was clear from the Virginian grandeur of Whitfield's house. It was stately rather than showy, but definitely nothing that a government salary would swing. Ambler pulled up to the large double doors at the center of the house and got out of his car. He rang the doorbell. Moments later, a woman in a maid's uniform of worsted black and a frilly white front, a Filipina, came to the door. "I'm Hal Ambler, and I'm here for Ellen Whitfield," he said, biting off his words. "Madam, not seeing anybody," the uniform woman said. Then, more stiffly, she added, "Madam, not here." She was lying, of course. If Ambler hadn't already known, Whitfield's voice could be heard from an adjoining room. Ambler pushed past the protesting Filipina, strode down the tiled foyer, and barged into a wood-paneled library with a large bay window and double-height bookshelves. There was Ellen Whitfield, sitting in front of an array of documents with an older man. Ambler stared. The man looked familiar somehow. He was silver-haired, scholarly-looking with a prominent forehead. His red silk tie was tightly knotted and disappeared into a buttoned sweater vest under a tweed jacket. Both of them were absorbed in the papers before them. "Madame, I told him, you know," as the silence was broken by the noisily protesting Filipina. Both Whitfield and the silver-haired man looked up suddenly, startled and dismayed. "God damn it, Ambler!" Whitfield yelled, surprise now surging to a towering reach of indignation. "What the hell are you doing here?" The older gentleman had turned away from him, as if he had developed a sudden interest in the books on the shelves. "You know goddamn well what I'm doing here, Undersecretary Whitfield," he returned, uttering her title with withering scorn. "I want answers. I'm fed up with your delaying tactics. You think you can dodge me? What are you trying to hide?" Whitfield's face was mottled with fury. "You paranoid son of a bitch! Get out of my house! Get out now! How dare you violate my privacy like this? How dare you?" An outstretched arm pointed to the door. Ambler noticed it was trembling. With rage, fear, both it seemed. "You got my memorandum," Ambler replied icily. "It contains the truth. You think you can bury that truth? You think you can bury me? Well, forget about it. Believe me, I've taken precautions. Look at yourself. Listen to yourself. Your conduct is totally unprofessional, verging upon the unhinged. Don't you hear how crazy you sound? In my job, I've got to deal with more things than you can possibly imagine. If you want a conference, we can conference first thing Monday. But listen to me, and listen to me hard. If you're not out of this house immediately, I will have you banished from the services of this country, permanently and irrevocably. Now get the hell out of my sight." Ambler stood, breathing hard, his own anger somewhat preempted by her stormy ire. "Monday," he said heavily, and he turned to go. A few miles outside of Fox Hollow, an EMT box van with pulsing red lights and sirens suddenly appeared behind him, and he steered to the side of the road. Swiftly, the ambulance pulled over in front of him, and another car, a heavy Buick, pulled over behind him, blocking him in. Several men, emergency medical technicians, but something was off, poured out of the ambulance. Others emerged from the sedan behind him. As they pulled him from his car, a hypodermic jabbed graciously into his arm. He tried to make sense of what was happening. The men were acting in an official capacity, following orders, behaving with the practiced efficiency of professionals. Yet who were they, and what did they want from him? The fog in his mind had not burned off entirely. It hovered over what came after, as it had been over what had come before. As he was strapped onto a gurney, he heard quiet, tense exchanges among the team of medics. Then his consciousness began to waver and dim. It was the beginning of a long twilight. It was twilight, too, when Ambler opened his eyes again. A few days ago, he had been an inpatient at a maximum security facility. Now he was an ocean away, and he was still not free.